In a small town, there was a woman who everyone respected, even feared, a sheriff by day. Her name was Maria, and she had earned the badge and the authority that came with it. She was strong, determined, and known for her strict sense of justice. People trusted her to keep their town safe, knowing that she would never back down from doing what was right, no matter how difficult. Maria had always dreamed of serving the community in this way. As a young girl, she'd watched her father, also a sheriff, work tirelessly to protect their town. His courage and honor were her guiding lights. When she finally got the chance to follow in his footsteps, Maria didn't hesitate. She took on the job with pride, making sure to uphold the law every day, no matter the cost. She had no time for the drama or distractions that others might indulge in. Her only focus was ensuring that the peace of her town remained unbroken. But even the most dedicated law enforcers can't escape the harsh realities of life. The town wasn't perfect. Behind the closed doors of well-kept houses, there were secrets that Maria had to deal with daily. There was corruption, crime, and violence hidden under the surface. Many of the town's wealthiest and most influential people were part of these darker dealings, and Maria knew it. She had to look the other way sometimes, turning a blind eye to small injustices simply to keep the peace. It was something she hated doing, but there was no other choice. If she didn't, the entire system would collapse. Her quiet rage grew with every passing day. How could she continue to enforce laws while the rich and powerful ignored them without consequence? How could she protect her town when those who were supposed to be trusted were the ones pulling the strings? It felt like she was trapped in a system where justice was often out of her reach. Yet, Maria never allowed herself to express her frustration openly. She continued to patrol the streets, answer calls for help, and deal with criminals as best as she could. But the longer Maria wore the sheriff's badge, the more she began to feel a simmering anger inside. It wasn't enough to simply enforce the law. She felt as though she needed to do more. There were so many cases that went unsolved, so many wrongs that never got righted. She was beginning to believe that the system was broken beyond repair. Something needed to change, but what could she do? Maria's nightly routines began to change too. When she wasn't answering calls or working at the station, she spent her time thinking about what she could do to fix things. She was determined to make a real difference, even if it meant crossing some lines. She was getting tired of playing by the rules when the world around her didn't seem to care about them at all. Deep inside, she knew that the answers wouldn't come from the courthouse or the sheriff's office. There had to be another way to take control and bring justice to her town, a way that no one would see coming. But for now, Maria kept her secret. During the day, she was the calm, steady sheriff everyone knew and respected. At night, a new side of her began to emerge, one that would blur the lines between justice and vengeance. And that was just the beginning of the path she was about to walk. By night, Maria's world transformed. She hung up her sheriff's badge and put on a new identity, one that no one in the town knew about. When the sun dipped below the horizon, she would disappear into the shadows, taking on the role of someone completely different. At first, it started small, little acts of rebellion against the system she had once sworn to uphold. A broken window here, an unnoticed crime there, just enough to make her feel like she was doing something, anything, to fight back. But as the days turned into weeks, Maria's secret life began to grow. She found herself meeting with people from the darker side of town, the ones who made their living in ways that were far from legal. They were the criminals, the outcasts, the ones who had no place in the justice system. And Maria, she didn't just observe them, she joined them. She started to slip into the world of underground dealings, using her position as sheriff to gather information and gain influence. Her motivation was clear. The town had become a place of unfairness, where the law didn't always protect the innocent. She could no longer stand by and watch as those in power twisted the rules for their own benefit. In this new world, Maria found a strange kind of power. She knew the right people, she had the connections, and now she had a way to manipulate things from both sides. public and private. She could enforce the law during the day, but by night, she was the one pulling the strings. Maria's interactions with the town's underworld became more frequent. She would meet with gang leaders, underground business owners, and people who knew how to get things done outside the law. The more time she spent with them, the more she realized that they were just like her, people who had been pushed to the edge and made to fight for survival. In this world, Maria didn't just have the power to act. She had the power to control the outcome of any situation. But as she grew deeper into this second life, Maria began to question her own morals. Was she still fighting for justice, or had she become part of the very system she had once despised? She could see both sides of the story now. On one hand, she was helping to bring down corrupt leaders who thought they were untouchable. On the other, she was using the very method she had once sworn to fight against. As the lines between sheriff and gangster blurred, Maria became a woman of two faces. During the day, she wore the uniform, answering calls, patrolling the streets, and upholding the law with an iron fist. But by night, she slipped into a world where the rules didn't matter, where every decision was made by power and influence. She began to feel like a different person, someone who didn't just enforce the law, but made it bend to her will. Despite the growing sense of control, a part of Maria still longed for the simple black and white world of justice she had once believed in. But that world no longer existed. She was in too deep now, and there was no turning back. The woman who had once stood for what was right had become something else entirely. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that she had crossed a line that would forever change her. As Maria's life continued to spiral between two conflicting worlds, the pressure of keeping her secrets began to take a toll. She was always on edge, never fully at peace. By day, she had to wear the mask of the law-abiding sheriff, constantly watching for any sign of danger or wrongdoing. She carried the weight of the town's safety on her shoulders, and it was a responsibility that never let her rest. At night, her other life beckoned, calling her to make choices that went against everything she once stood for. This constant balancing act wore her down. She could no longer remember the last time she had a peaceful night's sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind raced, replaying the decisions she had made during the day and wondering if anyone was getting too close to uncovering her secret. It wasn't just the fear of discovery that kept her awake. It was the guilt of living a lie, the guilt of becoming someone she never thought she would be. Her personal life began to suffer too. Maria had a close-knit circle of friends and a few family members who depended on her, but she was slowly pushing them all away. She couldn't risk anyone finding out about the double life she was leading. Every time someone asked her how she was, her smile felt like a mask, and the words she spoke didn't reflect the chaos inside her. She stopped sharing her feelings with the people who cared about her, and slowly, the distance between them grew. Her closest friend, Laura, began to notice the change. Laura had been with Maria since childhood and had always been the one to keep her grounded. But lately, Laura had been seeing a shift in her behavior. Maria was distant, distracted, and far more irritable than usual. At first, Laura thought it was just the stress of the job. But as time went on, she started to feel like something was off. She knew Maria better than anyone, and she could tell that her friend was hiding something. One evening, as they sat at a local cafe, Laura tried to confront Maria about the changes she had noticed. "You've been different lately," Laura said gently. "Is everything okay? You can talk to me, you know that." Maria forced a smile, but inside, she felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. She couldn't let Laura know. She couldn't risk the one person who still cared about her seeing the truth. "I'm fine," Maria replied, her voice strained. "Just a lot of work, that's all." But even as she said the words, Maria knew they weren't true. The truth was, she was far from fine. Every day, she fought a battle within herself, torn between the role she had chosen as sheriff and the dangerous world she had willingly stepped into. She felt like a stranger to herself, lost between the two identities she had built. Every choice she made seemed to pull her further away from the woman she had once been. As her world unraveled, Maria began to question the path she had chosen. Was it worth it? Was this the justice she had been fighting for? She thought about the town she had sworn to protect. Was it really better off because of her actions, or had she become part of the problem? The more she tried to make sense of it all, the more confused she became. She knew one thing for certain: the life she was living couldn't go on forever. Something had to change, but Maria wasn't sure if she could ever go back to the life she had before. She was caught in a web of her own making, and escaping it seemed impossible. Every decision she made seemed to lead her further down a road with no easy way out. And that's when the real struggle began. Maria's life had reached a boiling point. Every day felt like a carefully constructed lie, and the weight of keeping her two worlds separate had become unbearable. The tension was creeping into every corner of her life. No matter how hard she tried to maintain control, she could feel herself slipping further away from the woman she used to be. It was becoming harder to wake up every morning, knowing that she was walking a fine line between the law and the world of crime. But what choice did she have? She had already made her decisions, and now there was no turning back. The breaking point came unexpectedly. One evening, a case came across her desk, a brutal crime that hit too close to home. It was a robbery, but not just any robbery. The criminals had targeted a family she knew well, one she had sworn to protect. The crime left the family shaken, and Maria knew that the criminal who had masterminded the attack was no stranger to her. He was part of the very underground world she had been so carefully walking in. The knowledge hit her like a punch to the gut. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Her two lives were about to collide, and she had to decide which path to follow. The man who had orchestrated the robbery was someone she had worked with in the shadows, someone who trusted her, and someone who thought she was on his side. He had used her position as sheriff to further his own agenda, and Maria had turned a blind eye, convincing herself that she was only playing the part of the observer. But now, seeing the innocent family torn apart by this crime, she could no longer justify her actions. For the first time in weeks, Maria felt a fire of determination burning within her. She couldn't let this go, not this time. If she wanted to make things right, she would have to confront the world she had been a part of. She knew the risk. The moment she stepped out of line, everything she had built could come crashing down. Her sheriff's badge, her reputation, her safety, all of it could be taken away. But what did it all matter if she couldn't live with herself? The choice was clear. She would take action, even if it meant going against the very system she had sworn to uphold. That night, Maria made the decision to confront the man behind the robbery. She used the information she had gathered through her position as sheriff, her connections in the criminal world, and the trust she had earned over the months. She arranged a meeting with him, under the guise of discussing an unrelated matter. But in her heart, Maria knew this wasn't just another conversation. This was a confrontation, a test of everything she believed in. When the time came, she stood face to face with the man she had once seen as an ally. The coldness in his eyes reminded her of just how far they had both strayed from the path of justice. "You know what you've done," Maria said quietly, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. The man looked at her, a mixture of surprise and suspicion crossing his face. "I'm not the one who needs to explain," he replied. "You've been playing both sides, Sheriff. Don't act like you're any better than me." Maria didn't flinch. She knew the truth. She had been playing both sides. But now it was time to take a stand. The weight of her choices was heavy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was finally making the right one. This time, justice would be served, not just for the family, but for herself as well. She was ready to face whatever came next. Maria's decision to confront the criminal behind the robbery was one that would change everything. The moment the words left her mouth, she could feel the air around them shift. The man's expression went from confident to wary. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone like Maria. She had always been one of them, playing her part in the underground world, turning a blind eye to his actions. But now, she wasn't just another player in the game. She was the law, and she had decided to make sure he would pay for what he'd done. The tension in the room was palpable. Maria stood her ground, her eyes fixed on the man who had once been her ally. He had helped her gather information, guided her through the darker parts of town. He had trusted her, and she had used that trust for her own purposes. But now, as she stared him down, she couldn't help but wonder how much of that trust had been a lie. He had used her just as much as she had used him. And in that moment, Maria knew that the only way to fix everything was to stop pretending. The man stepped forward, his body language shifting from cautious to defensive. He knew that Maria was no longer the sheriff he had once thought he could manipulate. The lines between right and wrong had blurred for both of them, but it was clear that Maria was ready to draw the line once again. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin everything?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. "You're just as dirty as the rest of us. Don't pretend you've changed." Maria felt a pang of guilt, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had changed. She had to change. This was her chance to make things right. "I'm not like you," she said, her voice firm. "I'm done turning a blind eye to the things you've done. You hurt people. You destroy lives. And I won't stand for it anymore." The man scoffed. "You can't stop me. You're just one sheriff in a small town. You're out of your depth." Maria's heart raced. She knew he was right. He was powerful, connected, and ruthless. But she had something he didn't. She had the law on her side. And more importantly, she had the determination to see this through. "I don't need to stop you alone," she replied. "I have the whole town behind me." For a moment, the man's face showed doubt. Maria could see it in his eyes. He wasn't used to people standing up to him, especially not someone who had once been on his side. The power dynamic had shifted, and he didn't know how to handle it. But before he could say anything else, Maria made her move. She stepped back and reached for her phone, calling in backup. The man's face twisted with frustration. "You think you can just call for help and fix everything. You can't erase what's already been done." Maria didn't answer. She knew that she couldn't erase the past. What was done, and there were consequences for everything. But she wasn't about to let him get away with it. She had made a promise to herself, and to the people she had sworn to protect, that she would bring justice. And this was her chance to keep that promise. As the sound of sirens grew louder, the man finally backed away, realizing that Maria wasn't going to back down. The confrontation wasn't over, but in that moment, Maria knew she had taken the first step toward redemption. She was done with the lies, done with the double life. It was time to stand tall and face the consequences of her actions. Justice was no longer just an idea. It was a responsibility, one that she was willing to bear, no matter the cost. As the sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, Maria's heart raced. She had made her move, but the road ahead was far from clear. The man she had confronted wasn't just any criminal. He was a significant figure in the town's underground network. His reach extended far beyond the people who ran the streets at night. This was bigger than a robbery. It was about control, influence, and a system that Maria had spent years unknowingly feeding. She had just challenged the heart of that system, and now there was no going back. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was clear. She had made the right choice. For the first time in months, Maria felt a sense of purpose again. It wasn't just about the badge anymore. It was about justice, the kind that couldn't be bought or manipulated. The man may have believed that he was untouchable, but Maria had proven otherwise. The law was still alive, and she was ready to stand by it, no matter how many forces she had to face. But as the minutes ticked by and the sirens drew closer, Maria knew she couldn't afford to wait idly. The man's connections would move quickly. He had enough influence to make things complicated. If she wasn't careful, the whole operation could backfire. There was no telling what he might do to cover his tracks or shift the blame. Maria had to act fast. She reached for her radio, her hand steady despite the rising tension in her chest. "I need backup," she said into the device, her voice calm, though her thoughts were racing. "Make sure no one leaves the area." Seconds later, her fellow officers began to arrive, and the scene started to take shape. The man stood there, looking between Maria and the approaching law enforcement, his face dark with anger and disbelief. The power dynamic had shifted, and he knew it. Maria wasn't just a sheriff anymore. She was the one who had the upper hand, the one who had called for justice, and the one who would now hold him accountable. Despite the fear that still buzzed at the edges of her mind, Maria couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The years of living in the shadows, trying to balance the life of a sheriff and an underground figure, had taken their toll. Now she was finally stepping out into the light. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be consequences, but for the first time, she felt as though she was on the right side of everything. The officers moved quickly to secure the area, making sure the man couldn't escape or alert his network. Maria watched as they took him into custody, her heart still racing, but with a new sense of clarity. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. She had exposed a piece of the web, but there was more to uncover. The crime she had witnessed was just a glimpse of the larger problem that had been festering in the shadows for far too long. As the man was loaded into the back of a squad car, Maria turned away, breathing deeply. Her hands shook, but not from fear. This time, it was from the weight of what she had just done. She had crossed a line, yes, but it was a line that needed to be crossed. The town she had sworn to protect had been drowning in corruption, and it was time for it to be cleansed. She wasn't sure what the next steps would look like, but she was ready to face whatever came next. Maria stood there for a long moment, watching the flashing lights of the squad cars, the reality of the situation sinking in. The world she had once known was slipping away, but in its place, a new path was unfolding. She could only hope that she had done enough to make a difference. The rest of the journey would be difficult, but she was ready to see it through. The fight for justice had only just begun. Maria sat alone in her office late that night, the stillness of the empty room pressing in on her. Her mind was a blur of conflicting thoughts, but through it all, one thing was clear: everything had changed. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The man she had confronted earlier that day wasn't just a criminal. He had been part of a much larger network, one that she had been unknowingly supporting for years. In her efforts to bring justice to the town, she had exposed more than just one individual's crime. She had opened a door to a world of corruption and deceit that stretched far beyond her own understanding. Her hands rested on her desk as she stared at the case files spread out before her. The weight of the truth was overwhelming. She had spent so long trying to fix the small problems, trying to make the town a safer place. But now she saw the bigger picture. It wasn't just the criminals who needed to be stopped. It was the system itself that was broken. And Maria wasn't sure if she was strong enough to fix it. But she had to try. The more she thought about the choices she had made, the more she realized that her double life had been a lie. She had convinced herself that she was doing the right thing by walking both paths. As sheriff, she was bound by duty to uphold the law. As a member of the underground world, she had convinced herself that she was gaining valuable information, playing both sides to keep the town safe. But that had been a lie. All she had done was feed the very system that had caused so much harm. Now that she had exposed the first piece of the puzzle, she knew there was more to uncover. And the only way to do that was to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead would be. The silence of the office was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Maria didn't have to look up to know who it was. Laura, her closest friend, had been by her side for years. She had noticed the changes in Maria, the tension, the distance. She had been the one to notice when things weren't right. Maria hadn't wanted to involve Laura in her double life. But now, it seemed like there was no choice. Laura had a right to know the truth, especially if Maria was going to continue down this path. "Come in," Maria called, her voice heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Laura entered the room, her face full of concern. She took one look at Maria and could tell that something had shifted. Maria had always been tough, always in control, but tonight she seemed different, vulnerable, perhaps even a little lost. "What's going on, Maria?" Laura asked softly, her voice filled with both worry and understanding. "You've been distant for so long, and I know something's been happening. You don't have to keep it to yourself anymore." Maria hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain everything. But in the end, there was no more room for secrets. She owed Laura the truth, even if it meant risking everything she had worked for. "I've been living a lie," Maria said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been pretending to do the right thing, but I haven't. I've been part of something dark, and I've ignored it for too long. But today, I decided to stop. I'm done with it. I'm going to fix things, no matter what it costs me." Laura stood there, stunned by Maria's confession. She had known her friend for so long, and hearing this truth was like hearing a stranger speak. But after a moment, she walked over and placed a hand on Maria's shoulder, offering the only comfort she could. "I don't know what you're up against, but I know you're strong, Maria," Laura said quietly. "You've always done what's right. You just have to trust yourself now. You can make this right." Maria looked up at her, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't carrying this burden alone. Laura had always been the one person she could count on, the one person who had never judged her, no matter what. And now, that support felt like a lifeline. "I'm scared," Maria admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "What if I can't fix this? What if everything I've done has only made it worse?" Laura shook her head. "You don't have to fix it all at once. You just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time. You'll figure it out." The conversation lingered in the air, but Maria knew that Laura was right. She couldn't change the past, but she could control what came next. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be more challenges than she could count. But Maria wasn't afraid anymore. She had a purpose now. She was going to bring justice to the town she had sworn to protect. It was a long road, but she was ready to walk it. And for the first time in a long while, Maria felt like she was finally on the right path. Maria stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, the cool morning air brushing against her face. It had been a long journey, one filled with difficult choices, uncertainty, and moments of doubt. But as she looked out over the town she had sworn to protect, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time, it wasn't just a flicker of hope, but a steady flame that burned brightly within her. She had made it this far, and now it was time to finish what she had started. The events of the past few weeks had been a whirlwind. After her confrontation with the criminal, everything began to unravel. Maria had spent countless hours investigating, connecting the dots, and working tirelessly to expose the corruption that had poisoned the town. She had faced resistance, threats, and even moments when it seemed like the whole system would collapse on top of her. But through it all, Maria had refused to back down. She had come too far to turn back now. Her work had not gone unnoticed. The people who once questioned her motives were beginning to see the truth. The criminals, the corrupt officials, and the powerful figures who had once held the town in their grip were slowly being brought to justice. One by one, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, and Maria's relentless pursuit of the truth began to show results. But even as she stood on the steps, ready to face the press and announce her next move, Maria knew that the battle wasn't over. She had made progress, but there was still so much more to do. The road ahead was uncertain, and there were still people who wanted to stop her, who wanted to keep the town in the dark. But Maria was ready. She had learned the hard way that sometimes the fight for justice wasn't won in a single moment. It was won through persistence, through the small victories that added up over time. As the reporters gathered around her, ready to ask their questions, Maria felt a sense of clarity she hadn't had in years. She wasn't just standing on those steps as a sheriff. She was standing as a symbol of what could happen when someone refused to give up, when they fought for what was right, no matter the cost. She had taken the hard road, the one that many wouldn't dare to walk, but now she stood on the brink of something better. One of the reporters stepped forward, holding a microphone in front of her. "Sheriff Maria, you've uncovered a vast network of corruption in the town. What's next for you?" Maria took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was the moment. She had been preparing for this day for so long, and now it was finally here. "What's next?" she began, her voice firm and resolute. "Is a town that is finally free from the chains of corruption. It's a new beginning, not just for me, but for everyone who lives here. We're not done yet, but I promise you this. We will rebuild, and we will make sure that justice, real justice, is the foundation of everything moving forward." The reporters were silent for a moment, taking in her words. Maria knew that not everyone would believe in the change she was working toward, but that didn't matter. She wasn't doing this for the applause or the approval of others. She was doing it because it was the right thing to do. And in that moment, Maria realized that her work was bigger than herself. It wasn't about the badge or the title of sheriff. It was about making sure the people she swore to protect could live in a town where justice was truly served. As the crowd dispersed and Maria stood alone for a moment, she felt the weight of her journey finally begin to lift. She wasn't done yet, but she knew she had taken the first step toward creating a better future. And for the first time in a long while, Maria felt at peace. She had done what needed to be done, and now it was time to build the town she had always wanted. A town where justice wasn't a dream, but a reality. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Maria was ready to face whatever challenges lay in her way. She had found her purpose, and nothing was going to stop her from seeing it through. The work was just beginning, but with each step, she felt more and more confident that she was exactly where she needed to be.